Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in this House, to be the voice for the citizens of Calgary Midnapore. So it will be the second time today. It's the second time today that I'll be speaking on this matter of privilege. I have already spoken on this, but this time I'm going to speak a little bit more in French because the last time I mostly spoke in English. And so I will share a few words in French with my colleagues, given that I can do so. So before talking about this matter, I would like to make the point that unfortunately, it is not the first time that we have seen that the government is not willing to hand over the documents that we have requested. And it is not the first time that it has done so. In fact, we have a number of examples where they decided to keep the documents instead of handing them over. And yes, in fact, the first example that I have here is regarding the carbon tax, when we requested the documents to support the documents from the PBO, because he said it is more expensive for Canadians to have the carbon tax in place rather than receiving carbon rebates. And so we requested those documents, but unfortunately, once again, the government refused to hand them over. And so that was an unfortunate situation. The second case where we did not receive the documents from the government was when we were discussing foreign interference. And with that situation, well, this is a similar situation now, where we on this side of the House wanted the names that appeared in the foreign interference report. But unfortunately, the Prime Minister decided that he did not want to give us the documents once again. And even though we asked for these names several times in this House, they decided that they would not want to hand the documents over. They simply wanted to give the information that they thought was the right information. And when our leader, the member for Carleton, obviously he cannot talk about this matter because he does not have the documents that he needs to do so. So that was another situation. We did not, so once again, we didn't receive the documents we need. And what about ArriveCan?
There was another situation where we asked for documents. This time, documents on ArriveCan. We eventually got some documents and we heard some witnesses. Mr. Christian Firth, that witness, decided not to cooperate with our committee, the Government Operations Committee. For that reason, he was called to the bar of the House. And certainly, Mr. Firth was causing problems, but so was this government. They simply decided not to hand over the documents. So, an increasing number of people have suffered due to this government's action and inaction, especially their refusal to hand over documents. Yes, Christian Firth did something wrong. He refused to hand over information to us, but he is also a victim of this government. Another example came up where the government refused to hand over documents. Here, I am thinking about the Winnipeg Labs scandal. That was a whole other issue. And on that occasion as well, we did not receive information and documents about two scientists. And once again, a public servant, I believe the deputy minister, was forced to come before the bar of the House and receive a punishment, an admonishment from the House. So there was a whole other situation. And what do all of these situations have in common, Mr. Speaker? They all involve specific individuals, but at the end of the day, it's the government's responsibility. The government is the one that failed to hand documents over. Yet another example, Mr. Speaker, we can talk about the We Charity scandal. We called for documents on We Charity, and what happened was really interesting. In the other scandals I mentioned, they all they all started under this government, except for the Winnipeg Labs scandal. I believe that started under the previous parliament. The Liberals have, of course, been in power for 3 parliaments. The final scandal I will talk about has to do with the Governor General. We never received documents on her. So unfortunately, there's a great deal of examples where we, as parliamentarians, didn't get the documents we called for, despite the parties of this House passing a motion calling for documents. Unfortunately, the government doesn't always listen to us. This is because we have a government that is trying to cling to power with support from the NDP. For me, the most difficult thing about all this isn't just the fact that we didn't get the documents we need. It's not just the various scandals we have seen. It's the fact that the NDP is still propping up this government at a time when many Canadians are suffering. Many Canadians want there to be elections. They want a carbon tax election. So this is truly a difficult time, both for the House of Commons and for Canada. Canadians don't want to continue down this same path. That includes Quebecers, Mr. Speaker. People from Quebec and all throughout Canada are calling for elections, given the situation that they are facing. This includes the fact that Quebecers and Canadians are increasingly unable to afford food because the cost of food is much too high. It's leading to hunger. We've heard many sad stories here in this House about how people are unable to buy food because of high costs under this government. And another thing, What about young people who want to buy their first home? They are increasingly unable to afford to do so. Why? Because the costs of housing are much too high these days. People are unable to pay their mortgage. Mortgage payments are through the roof these days. It's all because of housing costs and high interest rates caused by this government. So we've heard a lot of sad stories. They constitute the reasons for which Canadians want a carbon tax election. So, yes, and another thing, Mr. Speaker. This has to do with the cost of gasoline. Gasoline is more and more expensive due to the carbon taxes put in place by this NDP Liberal government. It's driving up costs for Canadians. So the cost of living is high these days. The government talks about the high cost of living, but it's in fact their fault. Many things, almost everything really, are increasing in cost. So yes, this government refuses to hand over documents, and they also refuse to create an environment where Canadians can thrive. Because, as I have noted, food, gas, home heating, housing, everything is expensive under these Liberals. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the economy isn't the only thing that this government is mismanaging. I have a number of other examples of things that the government is failing to get a handle on. This includes passports. In fact, we are facing a situation involving the government House Leader who can't seem to handle the creation of passports. That's something truly unfortunate because during the pandemic, there were many Canadians who wanted to travel and who couldn't travel because they couldn't get their hands on passports. So that's another example of how this government is inept. We have seen the same thing with forest management, Mr. Speaker. The wildfires in Jasper were a tragedy. But why were they so severe? Because the government decided to ignore scientists speaking about the threat of a severe fire in Jasper. For that very reason, unfortunately, we had terrible fires. And again, it was the fault of this government. This government's fault. So yes, and then there was another situation, because the former transport minister said that it was Canadians' fault that they were not able to travel. The transport minister failed to take responsibility for the transportation system that he destroyed during the pandemic. I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. Interpreters are noting that, and the member has 5 minutes left in her speech, but interpreters are noting that the sound of papers shuffling around is being picked up in the microphone. I wonder if your binder is actually touching the mic. I hope that you will be able to get rid of this noise. Ah, yes, it's probably that piece of paper there. Again, the honourable member has 5 minutes to finish her speech. Apologies. I will do my best not to shuffle my files around. Unfortunately, I need a lot of files on the table because there are so many examples of where the government let Canadians down. So, I will continue. The next example that I have showing that the government failed to take responsibility was the Governor General affair. I mentioned this earlier, noting that we did not receive documents that we called for. But now I have some more information on this, Mr. Speaker. There was a situation where the government refused to hand over documents on almost $300,000 worth of spending by the Governor General. We got no clear explanation about this high spending, so we asked for an itemized list, and we did not get it. I have already brought up We Charity, but I have more information here on this affair, Mr. Speaker. There were lots of redactions. Redactions made by the public service and by public servants, but really, the government is supposed to be responsible for public servants. So perhaps the government can ask their bureaucrats to stop redacting documents provided to committees and to the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker. Another example of documents was the issue of the CBSA. The CBSA failed to provide documents regarding the costs of external contractors. That is another important example. It's important for us to have accurate information so that we can review government spending and determine whether there are issues with spending processes or whether there's some other issue going on. So for this reason, it is very important for us to get our hands on the documents. And another example, one I have already brought up, is the issue of foreign interference. The article I am looking at says that the Liberals decided not to hand over 1,000 plus documents. That's a lot of documents. And lastly, there's the carbon tax. The Liberals refused to hand over an analysis of the economic impacts of the carbon tax. What is more, they refuse to explain why they are retaining these documents. A perfect time to conclude my speech, but I'll give a summary. We have seen on numerous occasions that the government refuses to share information with the House. They refuse to share information with us in the Conservative Party. And I think it is very important for the House to receive the documents we have asked for so that Canadians can have access to the documents, so that we can have our hands on the documents and go through them in order to determine faults where they exist, and also so we can figure out ways to improve our systems and our processes. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I think it goes beyond that. I think the government is being actively malicious. And here, I will end my speech. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for your time here in this House. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Speaker. The Honourable Member brought up housing, and I actually have a couple of questions with respect to the proposal by the Conservatives to take the GST off of the price of new houses. Will that cut apply to the first $1 million of a home that's, say, bought for $1.5 million? And secondly, will that tax break apply to people who are buying a property as an investment?
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
To the Honourable Member for that question. I will say that I just think the fact that the Leader of the Official Opposition has decided to take action and to make this important policy announcement, in fact, it's been called the most significant housing policy in the last 2 decades, the fact that he alone has taken this step to do that, this is more than what this government has done. I think, as always, the particulars of new legislation have yet to be determined, but clearly, as always, this leader is one step ahead of the Prime Minister in having announced this important policy piece. Mr. President, thank you very much.
Questions and comments? I recognize the Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to commend my colleague for her speech on transparency. I think that's something we ought to praise. I wonder if a possible Conservative government would commit to greater transparency and more accountability from the federal government, because in the Harper years, this was not the case. The Honourable Member. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Yes, I think it is the goal of any government. It should be the goal of the next Conservative government, and also the goal of our leader. We want to have greater transparency. Certainly, more can always be done by a party or a government or a party leader, but I believe that transparency is truly a priority for the member for Carleton, and I hope we can see a more transparent Quebec and Canada under a Conservative government and under our leader, the member for Carleton. Questions and comments? I recognize the Honourable Member for Barrie-Innisfil. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To an issue that was brought up earlier, and that involves the Prime Minister's key economic advisor, Carbon Tax Carney. We found out this morning that, in fact, he is moving the headquarters of Brookfield Asset Management, of which he is the chair of the board, from Toronto to New York. This is the key economic advisor to the Prime Minister, who has seemingly zero confidence in the Canadian economy and the Canadian tax system as well. And obviously, you know, there's got to be some advantages for him doing that, or else he wouldn't. So I'm just wondering if the Honourable Member can comment on Carbon Tax Carney's decision to take his company out of Canada and move it to the United States.
The Honourable Member of Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. President, and to my colleague for this question, and I enjoy our French exchanges, but I will respond in English this time. I think this is a disturbing trend that we're seeing beyond carbon tax Carney, conflict of interest Carney, is just the lack of not only foreign investment in Canada, but also the fleeing of dollars out of Canada. And I think that this is another example. Another example I would cite, Mr. President, is just the brain drain. I believe Canadians, Quebecers, they want to stay in Canada. They want to stay in their home province of Quebec and work, but it's getting more difficult because this is a government that does not support business, that does not support good jobs, and in fact works with individuals who are defying conflict of interest laws, to help them leave the country. So this unfortunately is a trend that we're seeing in this case of an individual who has broken conflict of interest laws, but outside of that, investment leaving Canada, young people leaving Canada. We need to keep business and jobs here in Canada, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member from Courtenay-Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear that we're all talking about the cost of living and the impact it's having on people across our country. However, Mr. Speaker, we have yet to hear the Conservatives talk about corporate greed and excess profits, despite the fact that oil and gas, big grocery, the big banks, web giants are all having record profits, Mr. Speaker. We saw grocery store margins, go from 1.5% on average pre-COVID to 3.2% today. So, Mr. Speaker, through you, I'd like to ask my colleague, why has a single Conservative not gotten up and raised the concern about corporate greed and the impact that's having on everyday Canadians?
The Honourable Member. Thank you.
Colleague, for the question. I will always support business. I will always support small business coming from a small business family. That's something, of course, the government doesn't do, as we saw with their attempt to implement those tax changes as far back as 2017. But I think a really important point here is, before we even talk about business, let's talk about the waste of money in government procurement. My goodness, if there is a place to start saving for Canadians so that they have to pay less taxes and have a more affordable life and a better cost of living, that would be with procurement on the government side. I'm very proud to be on the Government Operations Committee and to do that good work. The individual who asked the question is a previous member of this committee as well that looks into that waste. So certainly, while I hear his concern, I will always stand for business, small business in particular, Mr. Speaker. And I'd say let's continue our good work on the Operations Committee, and if we want to continue that good work further, let's bring down this government so we can have a carbon tax election. But let's look for the waste in government first, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary and Minister of Civil Protection.
Mr. Speaker, and I just want to pick up on the last comment by the member opposite. She was talking about procurement and making sure that Canadian taxpayers' money is being used efficiently. And yet we brought forward legislation for pharmacare that would reduce the cost of medications, especially with respect to reproductive medications and medications for diabetes, and yet the Conservatives voted against that. This is a program that would allow Canadians to be able to have access to medication, but also to be able, for the Government of Canada to be able to bulk buy. Would she not agree that would that be not something that would normally be something that they would have supported?
The Honourable Member.
And thank you to my colleague for the question. I believe that two things. One, programs are excellent if you can figure out how to fund them. And this government just is incapable of even funding the programs which they put forward to Canadians, a $42 billion deficit this year alone, Mr. Speaker. So you really must think about how you are going to fund something before you present it and you implement it. And this has been a fault of this government, unfortunately. And with the NDP propping up this government, it continues to be a problem. So I think it's very, very important that you sincerely consider how you're going to fund these things. But the greatest thing you can give Canadians, Mr. Speaker, is a lower cost of living through less government expenditure, which will lead to tax breaks. And that is what a government will do under our leader, the leader for Carleton. And we can't wait to do that for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
We have the time for a brief 30-second question. The Honourable Member from Central Okanagan.
Mr. Speaker, the Member of Parliament for Courtenay Alberni mentioned corporations that not operating with Canadians in mind. I raised in my intervention previously how the Liberals, through their process, gave funds through SDTC to companies that were not eligible to receive it. My constituents that were found ineligible for CERB had to pay it back. Does this member believe that they should pay it back?
The honourable member, 25 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the question. I just want to recognize that I had the honor of serving with the member who posed the question on the Human Resources Committee during the pandemic, and I think that was a very special time as we worked together to find solutions for Canadians, and perhaps we can expand upon that answer in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you